Does everybody know what sexting is? Yeah. So sending sexually explicit pictures. Who of you in the audience has read something about sexting over the past year or so in the newspaper, or has seen something in the news? I see a lot of hands. And the stories you read, was this in a positive context? Was it about something that went wrong? Was it about how fun it is? So who read something negative about sexting? And was it, did it concern adolescents? In most cases, yes. So we see over the last few years, there's been a lot of attention to this so-called new phenomenon of sexting. And when it occurs among young people, then it is also heavily problematized. Then there's a strong focus on possible risks that are involved. Of course, also adults engage in sexting, but when the topic comes up for adults, then it's more about that sexting can be a new way to pimp your sex life, to bring new energy in your relationship, and so on. But when it's about adolescents engaging in the behavior, then it's a big risk. We also see this in the academic research, in the research articles that have been appearing on the topic of sexting over the last few years. There has been a real boom on this topic, but the overall dominant discourse on sexting in the research literature is it's very strongly from a risk perspective also. So I'm happy with what Christine was saying. When we look at the evolution, when it's about sexual health in adolescents, we see this evolution of focusing on the possible risks involved towards a more positive evaluation of adolescents' sexuality. But when it comes to sexting, I feel like we are still a bit in this first phase of problematizing the behavior and focusing on prevalence rates, and focusing on investigating so-called protective and risk factors. With the idea that if we know the protective factors, if we know the risk factors, then we can focus on that in prevention, and then we can prevent young people from engaging in sexting. But of course, we can ask ourselves, is this a good perspective? Is it really just only a risk, only a problem? We know obviously young people do become sexually active. Almost everybody during adolescence will start to experiment and engage in sexual behaviors. We also know that for young people, the boundaries between the online and the offline world isn't really clear. For young people, the online world and what they do online is more like a continuation of what they do offline. Maybe for some adults it's also more and more the case, but especially for young people, online and offline isn't like two separate worlds. It's just one same thing, just with a different medium. We also know, based on research, that sexting, there can be a lot of reasons why young people engage in sexting, such as in terms of a game or experimentation, but for most young people they indicate that they send sexy pictures to flirt with somebody or in the context of a romantic relationship. And of course, for young people, they do not always have the privacy to engage in sexual behavior, or they can be separated by time, they can't see each other maybe. So sexting can be a creative way of overcoming those obstacles and to experiment with their sexuality. And we also know, based on research, that actually young people from sexual minorities, LGBT young people, engage more in sexting than heterosexual young people, because it can be a new, like a solution for them to engage in sexual behavior that is more difficult for them in the offline world. So sexting can also offer opportunities in terms of intimacy, in terms of bonding, in terms of experimentation. So next to this risk discourse that we see in the literature, we also see a normalcy discourse, and especially when sexting occurs in the context of a romantic relationship, then we see that it's more and more considered as part of the sexual repertoire, as part of just one of those sexual behaviors that young people engage in. But then, of course, the question remains, how does sexting become part of that sexual repertoire? Because the literature has been focusing strongly on prevalence rates and on individual risk and protective factors. So sexting has been studied mainly from that individualistic perspective, like individual explanations for why somebody engages in sexting. But that doesn't explain how the behavior itself becomes part of this sexual repertoire of young people. And I think that a sexual script perspective offers interesting opportunities to really understand how sexting becomes part of this sexual repertoire of young people. From a sexual script perspective, we consider human sexuality and sexual behavior, humans engaging, not as primarily a biological or a psychological thing, but as primarily something that is social. Because behaviors humans engage in a sexual encounter are based on what people believe is normal, is expected, is appropriate in that specific context. So it would be interesting to know, how do young people perceive sexting in the context of a romantic relationship? To what extent do they find sexting as something that is normal, that is expected when we have a romantic relationship? And this is something we studied among adolescents in Belgium. So I'm going to present results here based on a survey with 357 adolescents between 13 and 18 years old. It was about half male-female. I would like to say now that we only focus on heterosexual adolescents because we didn't have enough non-heterosexual adolescents to make comparisons. Which is a bit unfortunate, but I'm just warning you. So we wanted to know, how do young people perceive sexting in the context of a relationship? And then by sexting, we divided this between sending a sexually explicit picture and asking for such a picture, because these are two very different aspects of the sexting negotiation process. And we expect that there will be differences between boys and girls in how they perceive these two behaviors, or in the extent to which they perceive this is expected for a boy or a girl. And so we asked respondents to what extent they think it is likely that sending or asking for a picture, how likely is it that this will occur. We also distinguish between the general and the personal sexual script. With the general script, this means how young people perceive other peers of their same age from behaving in a relationship. So we ask peers of your age, if they have a relationship, how likely is it that the boy will ask a picture, that the girl will ask a picture, that the boy will send a picture, and that the girl will send a picture. And then we ask the same questions for their personal situation. When you are in a relationship, how likely is it that these things will happen? So this also enabled us to investigate if these expectations are gender specific. So gender specific in terms of, do boys have different expectations than girls, but also gender specific in terms of, do the expectations towards boys are different from expectations towards girls. So do we expect the same behavior from boys or as girls, or different behaviors? And then we also asked ourselves, are these expectations linked to other sexual behavior of young people? Because of course, sexual behavior will, young people will engage in lots of sexual behaviors and not just sexting. So first, the results concerning the general script. We found that respondents varied very widely in terms of their expectations regarding sexting, or regarding the sexting behavior of their same-aged peers. So this was the question, how do you think your same-aged peers would act in a relationship? So we do not have evidence for a shared sexting script, shared in terms of culturally shared, because all our respondents, I will show you the results immediately. Like here you can see the results. For the question, how likely do you think that a boy will ask for a sexually suggested picture, and how likely do you think a girl will ask for such a picture? So the green means is for the boys asking a picture, and yellow for the girls asking a picture. And you can see that the responses were very spread out. So they could respond on a 6-point scale, going from very unlikely to very likely. And we see that there's not really one category standing out. On average, boys were perceived to be more likely to ask for a picture than girls. So we see a little bit of a gendered expectation here. Maybe to avoid confusion, these results are for all respondents taken together. So female and male respondents all taken together responded like this on the 6 categories. So boy and girl here means expectations towards boys and expectations towards girls. So from a boy, it is on average expected more that they will ask for a picture. Then what are the expectations regarding sending a picture? Again, we see that the expectations are very much spread out across the answering categories. So again, we don't really see any category standing out. There's not like a culturally shared expectation pattern among young people. And here, expectations towards sending a picture was not different if it concerned a boy or a girl. So it was considered just as likely that a boy will send a picture as a girl. So no differences according to gender here. Then we also looked at differences between male and female respondents in their answers, in their expectations. And we found that girls were more likely than boys to think that a boy will ask for a picture, that a boy will send a picture, and that a girl will send a picture. So overall, girls were more likely to expect that sexting will take place in a relationship among their peers. So this for the general script. Then we move on to the personal script. So for the personal script, we asked how likely would it be that you would send a picture, ask a picture, that your boyfriend or girlfriend would send a picture or ask a picture. And here the results are for male and female respondents separately. We see for asking a picture and sending a picture, we see that boys thought this was more likely that they would do this. So also in the personal script, boys thought that they were more likely to ask for a picture than girls, and also that they would send a picture. But there was no difference between boys and girls regarding their expectation towards being asked a picture or receiving a picture from their partner. We also see discrepancies between the general and the personal scripts, but respondents who thought it was more likely that sexting would occur in the general script were also more likely to think sexting would occur in the personal script. So we see a positive correlation between the two. But typically for all behaviors, sexting was perceived less likely in the personal script than in the general script. So young people think their same-age peers are engaging in more sexting than what they themselves personally would do, which was expected because people always tend to think that other people engage more in so-called risk behaviors than what they do themselves. And this discrepancy score was bigger or larger for girls than for boys. Then finally, we looked at a link between these sexting scripts and other sexual experiences. And we found that boys and girls perceived sexting to be more likely when they had sexual contact, and this was defined broadly as having had genital experience, so not just intercourse. For those respondents who didn't have had sexual contact yet, we asked how much would you want to have sexual contact in the upcoming year. Those who wanted to become sexually active were also more likely to say that sexting occurs. Those who also believed that they would actually experience their first sexual contact were also more likely to say sexting occurs. And we also found a positive correlation with watching online porn. So the more the respondents watched porn, the more likely they were to think that sexting occurs. So to summarize, I don't think we can say that there's a shared sexting script among adolescents. The opinions were very diverse. It was less gender specific than we expected. Only some differences. Boys were perceived to be more inclined to ask for a picture. And these personal expectations of young people are very much informed by what they believe their same-age peers are doing, but also by their own sexual experiences. And then to conclude some implications, I think this shows that we need to pay more attention to the social context of the young people, because when you look at the literature on sexting, it departs very much from an individualistic perspective, but the behaviors that young people find expected or appropriate are not formed in a social vacuum. They are formed in relation with their social context. I think we should consider sexting as part of the sexual trajectory, and therefore it also has to be part of sex education, because now sexting is sometimes included in ICT training or online workshops about online safety, which is okay, but I think it should also be included in the general sex education. And I think gender specificity is more relevant in terms of the consequences when the pictures are distributed, because here, when it comes to asking and sending pictures, I think the expectations are not that much different toward boys and girls, but that doesn't mean that gender is irrelevant in this entire sexting debate, because when we look at the consequences when a picture does get distributed, then we see that the consequences are a lot more severe for girls than for boys in terms of shaming, in terms of reputational loss. But I think right now the messages about sexting very much give the idea that it's only the boys who ask for pictures, who lure girls into sending a picture, but I don't think this really matches with reality. But that doesn't mean that gender is irrelevant. So thank you.